Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The next one is a pro-revenge story. This all went down about 5 years ago. I'm now happily hitched with 3 kids, and I don't regret a thing. I was with my ex-fiancée Claire for 3 years. She was a control freak. I had to give her every little detail of my day and my schedule in advance. If I deviated, she'd lose her mind. She claimed it was just leftover paranoia from past relationships where she got cheated on. But I never strayed or gave her a reason to act that way. Now here's where it gets spicy. After she asked for my schedule to make plans, I noticed her texting someone. In my job, if I work over 40 hours, I can take time off later as long as I finish the work. I was close buds with my coworker Dan, and we still crack up about this story. I told Dan I wanted to surprise Claire a bit before our anniversary. He let me know her schedule since they worked together. She was a shipping manager and he was a fabricator. That's how I found the discrepancy. Unbeknownst to me, she was skipping overtime. She worked 12-hour shifts Monday through Friday, except Wednesdays when she only worked half days, and that's when her controlling behavior started. Luckily, I had racked up some vacation days, so taking Wednesdays off wasn't an issue for me. A few days later, it was Wednesday. I put in my work clothes and left for work. I expected her to leave too since our apartment had 2 exits on the same road, and I could see from a shopping center across the way. I parked my car in the back and waited. After an hour, I spotted her uncle's distinctive red Mustang with a decal on the rear window. I had also set up an old laptop with a webcam view of our living room, bedroom door, bathroom, and kitchen to alert me if it detected movement. Giving her the benefit of the doubt, I thought maybe he was just dropping something off or helping her with something, like her family sometimes did. Sure enough, the laptop alerted me, so I remote accessed it. He walked right in, she unbuttoned his shirt, and they started making out. I created a live stream link. As they were preoccupied, we had a family group chat and a friends group chat that they were both part of but too busy to check their phones at the moment. They didn't even make it to the bedroom. They just got down on the couch right there. I sent the live stream link to both group chats. My phone immediately blew up with calls from friends and family. She was getting bombarded, but she ignored her phone. It wasn't until the 4th or 5th call that they finally took a break. In this state, you can record on your own property regardless of who's there. I was the only one on the lease since her credit was shot. The call she finally answered was from her uncle's mom, who she had been hooking up with. She put it on speaker, and the first words out of her mouth were, "Stop ducking my son." They froze up, and Claire stuttered. "What are you talking about?" Her aunt then revealed that I had sent a live video of them to the family. Claire grabbed pillows to cover herself up. Her uncle struggled to get his pants and shoes on, tripped, and smacked his head on my coffee table, leaving a dent. By then, I had made my way to the front of the apartment complex. I was there to greet the cheater as he exited. He froze when he saw me and started crying and apologizing profusely. I'm not proud of what happened next, and I almost got in legal trouble if he hadn't been trespassing on private property. Let's just say I had a cast for 6 weeks, and he missed a few family photos. I went upstairs where Claire was now dressed and bawling. I asked her if that was snot or cum on her face, then said it didn't matter anyway. I gave her 1 hour to grab her stuff since everything else in the apartment was mine, except her clothes, some makeup, and a few kitchen items. Her mom was too embarrassed to let her move in, and so were her brothers. Her aunt kicked out her uncle too. Word spread quickly in our small town, and Claire became a pariah. The first one is an entitled people story. Living on a quiet street was always the dream. No blaring traffic noises, no loud neighbors partying all night. Just peace and quiet. That's what sold me on this little suburban home when I bought it 10 years ago. The neighborhood was filled with plenty of friendly families and retirees looking for the same laid-back lifestyle. Everyone looked out for each other and respected boundaries. Well, all except for one numbskull who moved in a few months back, my new neighbor Bill. Bill was a single guy, probably in his late 30s. From the moment he rolled in with that obnoxiously loud pickup truck, he just radiated the vibes of a self-entitled jerk. Sure, I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt at first. We all have our quirks, right? But Bill's antics quickly revealed him to be a massive pain in everyone's side. He'd crank up loud music into the late hours of the night, letting his dog bark incessantly in the backyard. I've got no issues with people having a good time, but Bill took it to obnoxious levels without any consideration for those around him. Multiple neighbors had already approached him to keep it down, but he'd just sneer and blow them off. I knew it was only a matter of time before he crossed a line with me, too. It happened one sunny Saturday afternoon. I was out front doing some yard work, pulling weeds, trimming hedges, just trying to get my humble castle looking prim and proper. That's when I heard a roar of an engine and that unmistakable sound of crunching wood and screeching metal. I spun around just in time to witness Bill's truck barreling straight through my white picket fence. He slammed on the brakes, but the damage was done. There was now a massive gap in the fence where he'd plowed right through it. To make matters even worse, he then proceeded to park his truck on my lawn. Just straight kicked it into park and stepped out, not even a hint of remorse on his smirking face. "Nice one, Bill," I shouted out, sarcasm dripping from my voice. "Mind telling me what in the hell you think you're doing?" Bill shrugged. "Had to park somewhere, didn't I? You should be thanking me for getting rid of that ugly-ass fence for you." That arrogant prick. I stormed over, fists clenched as he casually leaned against his truck on my property. "Get off my lawn this instant and move your truck. You just destroyed my fence." "Or what?" Bill sneered, not even looking at me. "You gonna cry about it?" In that split second, I swear I saw red. I moved towards him, half considering taking a swing at his smug face, but I caught myself at the last moment. As satisfying as knocking out a few of his teeth might be, I knew resorting to violence would only land me in hot water. With immense willpower, I took a deep breath and decided to take the high road. "Listen here, jackass," I growled through gritted teeth. "I don't want any trouble, but you need to get off my property right now before I call the cops on you for trespassing and destruction of property." Bill let out a mocking laugh. "You don't got the balls, but fine. Whatever gets you off my back." With a sarcastic wave, Bill got back in his truck and peeled off. At least now he was off my property, and took a moment to stare at the complete wreckage of my fence, letting out an exasperated groan. There was no way I'd be able to fix that on my own. This was easily going to be thousands to replace. That's when something inside me hardened with resolve. Bill wouldn't just be able to saunter away from this unscathed. His callous disregard for my property and rights as a homeowner wouldn't be tolerated. I grabbed my phone and immediately called the police to file a report. An officer arrived, and I walked him through the situation, pointing at the skid marks on the lawn as evidence. He took notes, had me recount exactly what Bill said to me word for word. The cop mentioned that this wouldn't be the first complaint they'd received about Bill's disruptive behavior. "In cases like these, with clear evidence of trespassing and destruction of property," the officer explained, "we can pursue criminal charges if you'd like to press them against your neighbor." I'll be honest, the thought of slapping Bill with criminal charges put a devilish smile on my face, but I didn't want to come off as some vindictive hothead looking for petty retribution. However, the audacity of his actions definitely warranted more than a simple slap on the wrist. "I want to handle this through civil means first, if possible," I told the officer. "Have him reimburse me for the damages he caused. If he refuses or gives me any more problems, then we can look at pursuing criminal charges." The cop agreed that was a reasonable approach. He took down all the information for an official report, and sent Bill a letter requiring him to either reimburse me for the damaged fence within 30 days, or face a court summons. A small part of me hoped Bill's arrogance would lead him to blow it off because I was already picturing taking him to court. About a week later, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find a sour-faced Bill, begrudgingly holding out a wad of cash still wrapped in the bank's paper bands. He shoved it towards me without a word. I opened up the bands and began counting the money, making sure it was the full amount listed in the report. "I don't owe you an apology or anything. This ain't me admitting guilt," Bill grumbled as I counted. "Just paying the dumb fine so you'll quit your whining and leave me alone." As I tallied up the last of the bills, now totaling the full amount, I let out a soft chuckle. No, Bill, you don't owe me an apology. An apology requires humility and self-awareness, two things you'll never value. I tucked the cash into my pocket. But thanks for doing the right thing and paying for your mistakes, even if it was through being forced. With that, I shut the door in his scowling face, letting out a satisfied sigh. In the end, Bill paid up, and that was all I cared about. Just because someone is an arrogant jerk doesn't mean you need to stoop to their level too. Over the next few weeks, work crews came and rebuilt my beautiful new fence, even nicer than the old one. I also made sure to reinforce the section facing Bill's house to make it twice as strong and durable. I wasn't going to chance him plowing through it again in a drunken outburst. As for Bill, I noticed his loud partying and obnoxious behavior ceased for the most part. Maybe that cash punch to his wallet knocked some sense into him. Or perhaps the threat of further legal actions finally got through his thick skull. Either way, he seemed to have cooled it with being a nuisance around the neighborhood. Don't get me wrong, he's still an arrogant prick, but at least now he was being a quiet one who respected others' properties and boundaries. I'll take that as a win, paid for by Bill's own dumb mistakes. The next one is a petty revenge story. My friend Stan has worked at the Valuation Office of Assessments for his local council for the past 35 years. He's got a lot of stories, but this is my favorite. For context, the Valuation Office of Assessments is responsible for evaluating which council tax band a property should be on. The higher the band, the more council tax you pay. For those outside the UK, council tax is used to fund civic services such as schools, rubbish collection, and emergency services, etc. Which band you get depends on lots of different factors, but generally speaking, the more a property is worth, the higher the band is likely to be. Change to a property that significantly increase its value, such as getting pools or extensions built, can sometimes mean a property has to be reassessed to see if it needs to go up a band. There was a woman, let's call her Mildred, who would regularly call Stan's office to report her neighbors for everything. Mildred was a typical nosy neighbor curtain twitcher who made it her life's mission to know everyone's business. Her hobby was reporting her neighbors to the police, HMRC, UK equivalent of the IRS, immigration, and of course, the Valuation Office of Assessments. To give you an idea of just how awful this woman was, here are a few stories various neighbors told Stan and his colleagues. One neighbor got reported to HMRC because he came home with a fancy new car, therefore he must be evading tax. It was a 5-year-old Mondeo he'd just bought secondhand. Another neighbor was reported because Mildred didn't think their child looked sick enough to be off school, so she reported them for truancy. The child had recently had an emergency appendectomy, and they were at home recovering, as per their doctor's orders. Everyone in Stan's department hated this woman. Not only did she add to their already heavy workload, but she was also rude, entitled, and generally unpleasant to talk to. She often exaggerated her reports to ensure somebody would be sent to inspect the property. Worse still, her reports often caused her neighbors call and shout at Stan and his colleagues, understandably so. But what they hated most of all was that they were obligated to follow up on any report she made, and she never got in trouble for giving false or exaggerated reports. They knew she was just a mean old lady, and they didn't want to enable her behavior, but policy was policy. Well, one day Stan drew the short straw and took a call from the dreaded Mildred. My neighbors at number 61 added a new bedroom to their house, and they got a new kitchen in with an extension, and he put up a new shed. I bet they haven't reported it, Mildred whined. I demand somebody reevaluate them immediately. If I have to pay my taxes, so do they. Stan begrudgingly sent a letter out to the neighbor at number 61, let's call him Bob, feeling very sorry for him. A few days later, Bob called, clearly fed up. Bob explained that he had checked with the office before getting the work done, and he had been told that the work was not significant enough to be reported, so he didn't report it. There was a note on Bob's account confirming this. Throughout the whole conversation, Bob was friendly and nice. He knew Stan had a job to do. When the inspector attended Bob's property, Mildred stared gleefully from behind her curtains. However, the joke was on her because the inspector uncovered that Bob's house had mistakenly been put on the wrong ban for over a decade. He should have been on a much lower one. This meant Bob was due a massive rebate for overpaying his council tax for years. Stan laughed his arse off when the report came to his desk. He was delighted to call Bob and give him the good news. Here's the petty part. After the two had a good chuckle about everything, Bob told Stan he would use some of the money to throw a big Duck You BBQ garden party. He would invite all his neighbors except for Mildred. Bob mentioned he might get some banners made for the party that said Duck You Mildred, but Stan warned him that could get him in legal trouble. So instead, Bob decided the banners would say, "Thanks for the money, Mildred," instead. So Bob threw his big, flashy garden party, complete with banners he got printed, while Mildred seethed from behind her curtains, knowing she was responsible for Bob's sudden windfall. Mildred continued to report her neighbors for every little thing, so I guess she didn't learn her lesson. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I'm sure all of you reading this have to log their work time in one way or another, and I'm sure most of you don't agree with the granularity of said logging. So I work in IT. Many years ago, I was involved in a big project creating a new platform while maintaining the old one. So during the week, I would spend some time on support tickets. My role was more high level. I would never be the one to actually work on a ticket. At one point in time, there was a new support coordinator assigned to the client account. The number of tickets was rising and the team couldn't keep up, threatening the new platform. The coordinator needed metrics on the team's performance, so he generated reports from the ticketing and the time logging systems, combined them, and started looking into improvements. Until he came across my logs. The metrics told him I spend about 2 hours a week and edit a varying amount of tickets. This looks weird, and he couldn't bill the client on tickets I worked on, so he asked me what was going on. I explained that I would look over the list of open tickets, bulk update where needed, and log my time with a remark like classified tickets. Then I would move on to my other duties. He didn't like that and told me to enter a time log for each separate ticket I work on. I asked him what the minimum time was that he wanted me to log, which turned out to be 15 minutes. Fast forward a few weeks of me spending an hour a day logging hours and logging that task too, and creating virtual overtime of about an hour a day. Then the coordinator comes up to me with a request to go through and update the full backlog. I'm fine with that and tell him I'm logging that as a generic task and not per ticket. He tells me no, it must be logged per ticket. So finally, the malicious compliance. I spend about 2 hours to go over the backlog and make sure everything is in order. Then I spend the rest of the day entering everything into the time logging system. Fun fact, I was the first to reach the system's limits, but found a workaround to log everything. That day, as logged in the time tracking software, I worked for more than 16 hours. The rest of the week I took it easy, came in late, went home early. I was done for the week and every hour I worked extra would be unpaid, right? When it came time for the invoicing, the coordinator could not justify the huge amount of hours I logged on the account. My rate was twice that of a tech support. And finally, he allowed me to stop logging by the ticket. My productivity went up again, as did my mood. I did flag the potential problems and drop in productivity to the CTO and CEO, who I reported to directly, but they said to comply anyway. We did laugh about it afterwards and learned a lesson in how not to waste time. The next one is an entitled people story. Hi, I worked at a train museum for 3 summers in a row from aged 15-18, so I have plenty of stories and thought I'd share my experiences with the entitled people and crazies. For this to make sense, I need to explain the layout and way our museum works. We have 3 buildings: main station, freight shed, and roundhouse. The first 2 were built in the 1800s, and the second is a perfect recreation of a building built in the 1800s, but was built in the 1900s. Our station closed roughly 1960s, and the rest of the tracks were closed before 1990. Due to the way buildings were built back then, they are not necessarily accessible, and due to age do not have to be. There is no fixing the doors, as many of the doors are actually involved in holding the building up, and any changing of the inside of the building is incredibly dangerous and costs too much, and being historical is actually not allowed without the approval of several different committees. This is important to the story I'm about to tell. We have had only 3 wheelchair users in my time working the station. My job specifically was tour guide. I knew everything and anything there was to know. And for the most part, the wheelchair users can be in the main floor of the station and get into the other 2 buildings. They just can't get into one room of the main station or go upstairs. The first wheelchair user was a child, and due to the small wheelchair was able to get into the small room, and I brought stuff down from the upper floor to show him, as well as taking pictures using his camera so that he could see the stuff. I did a lot of up and downs, but he enjoyed it. The second wheelchair user sent her husband upstairs and he took pictures for her, as well as recording my tour so that she could hear about the artifacts, and I spent the time talking to the camera for her. It's the third wheelchair user that was the problem. Our door and deck were not level. The deck was lower due to the fact the deck was slowly sinking into the ground, so we had a ramp that needed to be placed at the doors. Most people understood that we couldn't leave it in place as the ramp also held the door open. She was here with her husband, and he came in and asked why there was no ramp into the door, and was getting very mad because his wife couldn't get into the building. I did my best to explain that the ramp was for the back door and needed to be placed separately. I explained the deck and building were very old, and that they were not made with disabilities in mind as the time period disabled people weren't brought to the main station, but to the freight shed, the only building that had a ramp in the 800s due to wheeled carts going in. My coworker was getting the ramp ready as I tried to calm the husband, but he only got more angry and yelled, "That was then, this is now." I was a bit confused and replied, "Yes, sir, I'm aware. That's why our deck has a ramp from the parking lot to the deck, but the deck is still from 1990s and has sunk down. We are replacing it soon and it will fit better, but for now our ramp needs to be put out separately." He huffed and went to get his wife and helped her get inside the building. They went into our display room, which had a big enough door for her chair. Then they wanted to see the next room, but it was quickly discovered her chair would not fit. I apologized and explained the building was built in the 1800s, when wheelchairs weren't commonly in the station, and were actually smaller. In fact, we have a wooden wheelchair upstairs that fits through the door, fine, but modern metal wheelchairs don't fit through the door. They seemed annoyed, but I showed pictures and explained what was in the room they couldn't get in, alongside the upstairs. The entire time they were both glaring and seemed upset with me. After we finished, I offered to take them to the other buildings. They didn't want me to come with them, but I explained the buildings were locked and you needed a guide to get to them. That's a whole other mess as they used to be open, but due to eating lead paint attempts and attempted theft of a 1800 bag weigher, they are locked without a witness. They seemed annoyed and asked why my coworker couldn't guide them instead. I explained that her job was to work the desk and give local information well. Mine was to give information about the station. Finally, we made our way to the freight shed, and there was no trouble getting in as it already had a ramp, and the door is a giant sliding one that has wheel hinges that I hate, but her wheelchair had no problems. In there, she was able to see everything without any problems, and they seemed to be brightening up. I was relieved that everything was going to be okay. I finally took them to the last building. Now, here's the big problem. This building houses an old train. There is no ramp. The way disabled people got in these trains was to have the train pull up to the freight shed, and a platform was lowered from the train to the freight shed. Over the stairs of the train others would use, and then the wheelchair would cross the gap and be brought in. Due to the fact it's in a building, we can't do this. We'd have to pull it next to the freight shed, which just isn't possible, sadly. We got in, and her husband asked if he could go in. I smiled and said yes, of course. He then asked about a ramp, and I kind of paused. These stairs are steep, think high, stepping to get in. A potential ramp to get up would have to be long or to steep, and the opening isn't wide enough for modern wheelchairs, just old wooden ones. I apologized and explained that she would have to be carried in, but that her chair couldn't go in. I explained the above, but that didn't seem to matter. They ranted and yelled about me ruining their vacation and left saying they were going to report us for a bulsim. I don't know who they planned to report us to, as everything we did was accommodations to the best of our ability, We are not legally required to make the old building any more accessible than a ramp due to it being completely original, and the train also does not ever have to be accessible because it too is original. We did get checked up by a museum inspector later on, but everything was approved as being safe and educational. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.